Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Russell. Russell, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show today, Russell. Well, before we dive in, real quick, some of my favorite questions. Let's get to know you and your background. Also, what do you love about content and marketing?
So my background, I come from actually a kind of studied physics in college and switched my track over to more a writing, rhetoric, and discourse, kind of general communications and rhetoric and discourse track. And so that really brought me into the world of I got into PR, that led me into marketing, led me into digital marketing, SEO, and kind of a combination of those. And that I think is really what I love about content marketing as well, and getting into things like thought leadership that we'll talk about, but being able to take that kind of holistic digital PR approach to a marketing strategy and have a lot of things cross-pollinate and tell a lot of stories and talk to a lot of really smart people and help make other people smarter and kind of turn your own learning journey into something valuable for others and do that as a job. So I enjoy that.
I love that. Like you mentioned, today we're going to talk about thought leadership. And what I love about the subject today that you specifically brought up, that this is something you're really passionate about, is really taking just a single conversation or an interview with a thought leader and turning it into multiple persona aligned assets. Now, there's a lot to that phrase and that statement and everything going on. But really off the get-go, Russell, what do you mean by this? Like when we're talking to thought leaders, how do we turn those into multiple assets? How do you think about that, and how are you getting the biggest bang for your buck out of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that highlights one perfect way to do that is be prepared for those conversations and know your personas and know what they would be asking or looking for from that conversation. And, if that's not naturally covered in the course of your conversation, call that out. And, surely that thought leader can help you understand that, or at least understand the questions that are still open that maybe you need to develop more. Going to these thought leaders, first, finding them in your company and, getting the involvement is obviously part of the challenge, but that's probably a separate conversation. But I think in those, again, knowing what direction each of your specific personas are going to come from and be looking for, and have an idea, ahead of time of probably where this might go, but being able to guide whoever you're talking to through those conversations or those questions as needed. And, after the fact, thinking about that in a similar way of what parts of this message make sense to this person, this one, and this one, or, what would this perspective mean for their job? And how is that going to be different across whoever we're talking to? Because trying to put that all in one place, is either going to kind of muddle things, or it's going to just kind of get lost in the details, or you're just, not going to make as focused of a statement to whoever you're trying to reach. And so being able to, again, go in knowing that you're going to do that, I think is half the battle, and get the thought leader into that perspective as well. Really makes things easier later on. It's almost at that point you get to the problem of, wow, I have so much to say. This is going to be way too long of a piece. But if I actually break this out by what's going to be useful to each persona, and even kind of jigsaw that together, and keep some common elements, you'll already, again, go from one thing that's big and maybe unwieldy to 2, 3, 4 things that are much more focused and someone's more willing to pick up. So that's kind of, I guess, the general approach.
I love that. So this is so cool. So I love how you started with the preparation. So just kind of talking about that logistically, you're going to talk to a thought leader, but you want to make sure you represent the viewpoints of all of these different personas in that conversation. How are you preparing for that? Are you actually going through and writing out personas and questions? Or is it more like, okay, let me just make sure I'm answering certain things, but like, what's the like tactical, how do you put on their individual shoes to mentally adjust to say, okay, I can go into this and really serve the needs of multiple personas in this conversation?
I've been lucky enough to either have or work to develop with the team really detailed persona kind of battle cards that'll help us with those. What are those top line pain points or questions or just roles and responsibilities that are of primary concern, in our kind of bubble. And even think of those in context of this specific thought leadership category or conversation. And coming prepared with questions or variations of a question to say, you said this and this, and you expect this to happen. Well, that makes sense for, persona A, but what would that mean for someone whose job it is to XYZ? And that's going to come naturally, I think, as you have those side by side and think about them in varying contexts. So having those available, if you're into the AI tool game, throwing them into Chat GPT or whatever, and saying having that prompt back to you and kind of work through those and say, here's a topic, how would you frame that for these three different personas, after studying these, and get some examples there. I mean, use, whatever resources are available, especially when you're sort of punching up and need to speak into topics that are developing because you're pushing thought leadership, and B, you're probably not an expert in because, again, you're speaking to experts. So I think that's really helpful. And just reaching out to other subject matter experts, or if you have customer or audience contacts, running it by them. That's always helpful as well. But I think, it is about that preparation. I mean, I would, if you don't feel comfortable, being able to jump through all of them naturally, knowing them really well, definitely just have some questions pulled out there and make sure that thought leader also understands who those are. I think at some companies, you're lucky enough that there's a lot of good collaboration between like marketing and product and other leaders, where there's really good alignment there, and other times there's not. So you might be speaking to a thought leader that doesn't really quite understand the nuances between certain audiences, something like that. So that's part of the prep work as well.
That's so cool. I'm curious, like just kind of throwing you a curveball. I feel like there's a cool opportunity for like a webinar where you have a panel, but rather than a host and a bunch of panelists, you have a thought leader, and all your different personas are the panels, and they get to ask their individual questions and have that information. It seems like that would be an interesting idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Getting that kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a roundtable, but really like almost interrogation almost.
Yeah.
in the best way possible. And that would be, I think, fantastic for all variations of that role too. Because I think the other part, especially when you get into where plenty of us end up in like enterprise SaaS or selling and marketing to a persona, but it's really you have to do all at once to help sales. But helping them talk to each other is part of that too. So that's another way I think that these thought leadership repurposings help as well, because you can also help whoever you do start getting that engagement, that relationship with, help them understand the perspective of their colleagues, that they need to kind of get buy-in from, but they don't quite know how to do that. So exactly that sort of thing would be awesome. We've done variations of that, I'd say, where we do bring in someone who was a champion for our solution, and kind of putting our marketing heads and their tactical, and organizational experience together, put together a webinar on actually building the business case and walking through, how this kind of investment affects the different people, how is it going to affect your audience's boss, but also their coworkers and their coworkers' boss or those other people. And obviously you learn a lot about what concerns them, and can then flip that around to, well, if I have this boundary pushing perspective, how is that going to affect that little concern I uncovered? So that's cool. That kind of stuff it starts, like I said, it starts kind of like pollinating itself, and then you start uncovering more. So that's the good part about it too.
Yeah, I love that. So logistically, just another quick question on this side.
Mm-hmm.
So I find a subject matter expert. I've prepared for that conversation really well, thinking through the different personas and their profiles, what questions they're going to care about so that I can come prepared. I have that conversation with the subject matter expert. How are you documenting the conversation with that individual in such a way that you can take that and separate it into those persona-based assets? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, again, like an AI tool is helpful here. If you have access to, Zoom, Gong, whatever that can record and transcribe for you, is great. So I find that helpful. I, like I said, came from a PR background, which involved doing phone, like picking up the phone and just interviewing people. So I got really good at just typing away while I'm interviewing and taking really good notes that way. But I don't expect that of everyone. So using a tool is helpful, and just recording and being able to jump back as needed. But definitely going through those notes and reorganizing them, using it as like a resource doc, really, and pulling that out and just, doing some of your own development of stories, and also probably finding some gaps that you need to go back and ask for clarification on. But it definitely helps to do that. And then you'll always have something to go back on. And, if you've achieved your purpose, you can pull it up again and probably find something else that could spark a new conversation. It's also, coworkers are definitely appreciative when you can hand them notes. If there's any level of organization, that's even better. But just notes in general that they can also look to and learn from and kind of search from. So I actually have one coming up next week. We're talking to one of our partnership VPs about the kind of new category that's newer to our solution. And so that's kind of the plan, is we want to learn, and then we also have some questions. And so our product marketing manager is joining that as well. So there's, again, already going into that, we kind of got two streams going. But yeah, all of that's helpful. Definitely treat it like, like an interview, go in with questions, record it, have great notes. And the more you can do to capture and to take good notes, the easier it is to create stuff, because you can drag it from one place and wordsmith it to make it fit. And yeah, it's helpful. And pulling quotes, are always great to have too. So that's a good way to do that.
That's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you've really kind of taken this approach of, this is almost like your digital PR or journalism kind of side. Like how do you kind of go into it with that mentality, this like journalistic public relations approach as you go into these conversations?
Yeah, the best way to do that is to always think about how you would sell this topic to an actual publication. So there's, even recently with Liquibase, there's been a couple conversations that we've been able to use to get articles published on like DevOps.com and G2's Learn Hub, and syndicate in a different newsletter and things like that. And knowing that there's an audience out there that has to be, I don't want to say baited like clickbait, but they have to be intrigued. And that, I think, really puts you into the mindset of what's going to serve like my marketing goals and my SEO and my product vision and all that, but what's going to serve my audience. And then come at it, as close to that as you can, and think of, how would I get a story that has a strong enough hook and that feels newsworthy enough that I could actually get an editor to run it. And then ideally you go get it and run it and get a great backlink and all that fun stuff too. But yeah, I think having that incorporated early on is good, because that's what makes it, public. Otherwise it's really just marketing. And then it's up to you to promote it. But if you lead with that, serving someone else's publication and having to earn that media coverage, I think that's the right mindset to go in with it. And that puts the thought leader in the right mindset too, because they get a little motivated, hopefully, to say something interesting.
Yeah. I love it. So as promised, these episodes come to a close really, really quickly. One final question. It sounds like this is really efficient for your content. Like, what efficiency gains can people kind of think about as they're kind of taking on this model and this idea?
Yeah, I think, what's great is you can, as you're creating one piece, if you're thinking about it in the right way, and you just have even space set aside in whatever document you're working on, is get that thought leadership topic in that perspective for your persona out there, and then write it as an email sequence, write it as a newsletter, write it as some social posts, write it to frame some other content, things like that. And do that, you're doing that all at once while you're in that headspace. And then you come out of that and you don't just have, say one article, but you have all this either supporting content or promotional material that you can hopefully leverage, with it to amplify it. So it's less of I need to do 4 times the work to, meet all these different 4 personas. It's really, you do the same amount of work and kind of divvy it up efficiently and jigsaw puzzle things together where they fit. And there you go. That's the premise, at least. There's obviously plenty of art and finesse within the science, I think. But it really helps. I've enjoyed it. And like I said, it really gets people motivated and gets you into some very interesting conversations. And I think that's what it takes to really make for an interesting day job too, to keep learning.
I love that. Well, I'm sure I could ask you questions for days, but we're going to have to call it here. But Russell,
sure, it's been great.
This has been so helpful. If anyone wants to continue the conversation, reach out or connect with you, how and where can they find you?
Best place is really just on LinkedIn probably is the best. I'm public and available there. I am doing content over at Liquibase. So we just launched a new website that's looks really great, and we're doing some fun stuff over there, and have a really strong team. So you'll be seeing a lot more of them. And feel free to reach out. And thanks for having me on. It's really a pleasure, and I've gained a lot from listening to these as well. So it's good to be part of the crew.
Love it. Well, Russell, again, thanks for the time today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.